Shabbat Shalom. I have to admit that anytime I prepare a Devar Torah in advance these days, a part of me wonders whether something might happen in the world between the time that I'm writing and the time that I'm speaking that would make what I'm going to say obsolete. We, along with so many other peoples in the world, have been subjected to such a constant stream of bad news and fresh anxiety in the past few years, and all the more so in the past 11 months. Many of us are walking around in a state of chronic exhaustion and uncertainty, on the edges of our seats waiting for the next crisis here or abroad, struggling to find a mooring in a world that is so constantly changing. And it's in a similarly narrow place that we find the Israelites in this week's Parshat of Re'eh, standing on the banks of the Jordan River and preparing to enter the land after having faced a dizzying amount of profound and nearly constant upheaval in their own lives. Think about it. They were released from bondage by a God that they barely knew, parched, starved, attacked in the desert by Amalek, miraculously fed manna, wandered for 40 years, and then brought up to the brink of a new life in the land of Israel just to learn that the only leader they've ever known is not going to join them when they cross over. They are each and collectively experiencing enormous uncertainty and change, and now they're being asked to create a society in a homeland that they've never even seen before. I imagine that each day felt as existential as our own. And it's in the midst of this inner and outer tumult that Moshe quotes God as saying to the people the first words of our parasha. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. See, Re'eh, this day I set before you blessing and curse. Blessing if you obey the commandments of your God Adonai that I am commanding you this day, and curse if you do not obey the commandments, but turn away from the path that I command you this day and follow other gods. Moshe is saying to his people in a moment when they are vulnerable and exhausted, open your eyes to the life that now lies before you, because you Israelites have a decision to make. Choose a life of blessing by obeying the commandments, or a life of curses by ignoring them and falling into idolatry. After 400 years of slavery, you finally have agency. But to ask the Israelites to step into this agency in the midst of so much uncertainty is a tall order. And so Moshe opens a long list of mitzvot throughout our parsha with which the Israelites can build their new society. He reminds the people of the laws of kashrut and the laws of tithes and the laws about where ritual sacrifices can take place. And apparently the fulfillment of these mitzvot will be the vehicle by which Israel will be able to create a life of blessing. Moshe begins this list with a rather curiously specific and I found somewhat unsettling charge. In chapter 12, verse 2, we read, "When you enter the land, you must destroy all the places where the nations that you shall possess worship their gods, upon the lofty mountains, and upon the hills, and upon every lush tree." In his commentary on this parasha, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg explains that this pasuk is declaring, quote, all-out war on idolatry. The Torah tells the Israelites to tear down their altars, smash their idols, burn their sacred posts, and cut down the graven images of their gods, destroying their name from that place. The fight against idolatry is to be a total fight, and the Israelites must make any trace of a threat to their own relationship with God disappear to have a chance at succeeding in the land. The Or HaChaim comments on this verse that in order to properly dispose of an idol, it must be shochek v'zoreh leruach o matil layam, not only ground up into small pieces, but scattered into the wind or into the sea. In other words, in order to live a life of blessing and build a holy spiritual life in the land, the Israelites, as a prerequisite, must first destroy and scatter the forces that threaten their new identity. The destruction of idols, as we know, has long been associated in our tradition with spiritual growth. In Exodus, when Moshe discovers that the people have built a golden calf while waiting for him to come down from Mount Sinai, he melts down the calf and grinds it up and mixes it in water and forces the Israelites to drink it in repentance. In Midrash Breshit Rabbah, a teenage Abraham famously destroys all of the idols in his father's idol shop, which is the first major step that he takes on his own spiritual journey. In an essay called The Idolatry of Nostalgia, Rabbi Daniel Klein explains that the idolatry with which our tradition takes issue is, quote, the worship of the static and the reduced. When we worship idols, we are in effect rejecting and attempting to arrest the evolving state of reality. Rabbi Klein is saying that to worship things is to worship a God of limited possibilities and to live in a world that can never change. And so our tradition interprets this idolatry as the greatest possible threat to a healthy spiritual life. And it celebrates those who have the courage to step up and smash idols. But the question is, did this war on idolatry ever succeed? And the answer, at least in the biblical record, according to Rabbi Greenberg, is a resounding no. He points out that the books of Judges and Kings show the Israelites constantly turning to neighboring idolatrous religions once they entered the land. And they're punished for this over and over in this cycle and encouraged to turn back to God. But their repentance is always followed by backsliding into fresh bouts of idolatry. Moshe melting the calf, Abraham smashing the idols, the Israelites destroying the Canaanite shrines, none of it ended the lure of idolatry once and for all. And in our own world, in which money and power so often corrupts even our best intentions, we know that the spiritual threat of idolatry is still ever present. And so perhaps our long history as a people that struggles with idolatry proves that it's impossible, and maybe even a little idolatrous in and of itself, to try and rid ourselves of the idols in our lives once and for all. Because attempting to do so reduces the complexity of our lives to something that's static and fixed. Assuming that we could ever completely smash every idol or fully master our own spiritual journeys ignores the fact that we as humans make choices in the context of a terrifically complicated world. We don't live in a vacuum. Social pressure and world events and our anxieties and our commitments, they don't go away when we're asked to make hard decisions, to discern between blessing and curse. Many of us learn this lesson the hard way year after year when our New Year's resolutions get sidelined as soon as life comes crashing back into view after the holidays. Our tradition ascribes really potent spiritual power to smashing idols, to once and for all finally aligning our lives with our values, but maybe we can't rely on that alone to ensure that we are choosing lives of blessing. And so we come to a more realistic and more sustainable path that Re'eh offers our ancestors for choosing a life of blessing. That of choosing blessing amidst the reality of ever-present challenges. This second path is laid out in our Parshat's explanation of how to treat the needy. We read in chapter 15, verse 4, as Moshe is explaining what life will be like when the people enter the land. There shall be no needy among you, since Adonai your God will bless you in the land that Adonai your God is giving you. Which sounds great. But then in verse 7, just a few verses later, we learn that there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor. Moshe declares that there will be no poverty in their new society, and yet in the next breath confusingly suggests that poverty will forever be a permanent fact of life, necessitating an ongoing response to the spiritual and ethical challenge of inequality. So let's go back to the context for this mitzvah. The Israelites received this commandment to open their hands to the poor at a time when it would make sense for them to turn inward and become selfish. After years of wandering, their resources and their energies were depleted, and they were nervously anticipating the challenge to come once they entered the land. And it's precisely in that moment of anxiety and uncertainty that God reminds the people the struggle to build a more perfect world, to choose blessing, to live a life aligned with our greatest values is not one that can be won in a single generation. We will always be struggling, and because we will always be struggling, it's in the midst of the struggle that we are invited to look for blessing. I think it was a masterful choice of our rabbis to to set up our calendar in such a way that we learn these lessons on the Shabbat immediately before Elul, the Jewish month preceding the Yamim Noraim, which begins on Tuesday night. Because Elul prompts us to ask the big questions. Who do we want to be in the coming year? What is the meaning of our lives? What would a life of blessing look like for me? The spiritual possibilities of this upcoming season are endlessly deep, but in a world as overwhelming as ours is today, particularly in the month ahead as we anxiously anticipate our election and pray for a ceasefire in Israel, spending time on these questions might feel like an unaffordable luxury or just an impossible ask. And so Parshat Re'eh steps in to remind us that this work of tshuva, of continuously striving to choose blessing, is actually never done in ideal circumstances, and it can never be finished once and for all. As Jews, we have always done the work of personal and societal tshuva amidst a changing world and challenges that don't go away. And our tradition expects that it is precisely in the midst of these challenges that true change can come. Re'eh anochi noten lifnechem hayom bracha uklala. See, I have put before you blessing and curse. Right in the midst of the Israelites' deepest emotional and geographical and spiritual turmoil, after 40 years of wandering, God reminds them that the work of tshuva, of finding ways to return to lives we truly wish to lead, is possible even when so much of our lives is unstable, and that to assume otherwise would be a diminution of the world of possibility that God created for us. The world will always be in process, and we will always be in process. And it's in that process that opportunities for tshuva can be found. And so as we stand at this precipice of this very special time in our year, still deep in the depths of war and uncertainty, may we each be blessed with an Elul of insight, of connection, and may we each welcome into our lives the possibility of deep spiritual growth, even in the midst of our very turbulent world. Shabbat Shalom.